Hello everyone and welcome to the FinTech Times. We're here today at the PAY360 Summit in London and today I'm joined by Connie. Connie, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be in an in-person event finally.
An in-person event, yes, face-to-face, finally. It's very refreshing. Very, very refreshing.
Yeah,
So,
lots of 3D people.
oh yeah, it's great. It's great to see everybody. And there's so many people here as well. It's really good. So Connie, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself? Who are you? Where have you come from?
Great, thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Connie Blacklock from JPMorgan. I'm the EMEA Head of Real-Time Payments. As I said, very excited to be here today. I've been part of JPMorgan for about 10 years and the last year heading up the real-time payment space. It's a very exciting spot to be in.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yes.
Well, today we're looking at everything to do with payments, of course. Payments internationally, payments in the UK. And, you know, I think this summit is very topical because we're, touch wood, just coming out of the pandemic. Yeah. Famous last words. And you know, the pandemic has had a huge influence on payments and everything that we would expect from a transaction. And you know, we have this phrase, you know, the new normal of the pandemic. What for you is the new normal of payments?
Well, good for me to say, being the head of EMEA Real-Time Payments, I'm very excited to be able to say instant is definitely the new normal. For me personally, it's something I was already doing. I was already using my phone to make payments and that expectation was already there. And I think the COVID environment in the last few years has just accelerated that expectation for everyone else, for maybe who hadn't made that move just yet. And so while I think that new normal is definitely already there in the retail side, the consumer side, we're definitely starting to see that shift into the business and corporate space as well, where you know you get to the point where why do I need to wait 3 days for my BACS payment? Yes, there are still some use cases for BACS, but maybe more just for legacy reasons. In the end, if I can make a payment in 10, 15 seconds, why can't I and why shouldn't I?
It's really interesting. You touched upon, you know, the fact that it was already in motion, which it was, you know, and you spoke about how it's sort of bringing it to the masses, if you will. Now, of course, I think things with contactless, its benefits are mainly hygienic, you know, in light of the pandemic. Yeah. But you know, you've seen a lot of movement in the space. I was wondering what you saw from the consumer front. How are the demands for payments changing?
I think that the increased shift to e-commerce. You know, everyone started shopping online. Again, I was already doing that, but I just saw it's in my friendship groups, with my family, and yeah, across the country, just more people doing that, and therefore a lot more people needing to do that, find those routes for digital payments and doing their online shopping. And they didn't just want credit card as an option, so I flipped between using PayPal or other, you know, providers like that, my debit card, my corporate card, my credit cards, and you want those options. And in the end, sometimes what would stop me doing a payment would be the one that had made it the most complicated to do that online purchase. And so I think it's accelerated the need, you know, e-commerce has accelerated the need for digital payments and the options, but also the need to simplify it, because people have had lost the ability to just walk into a store, pay for something and leave. They want that kind of speed on the internet, and if they're having to click loads of buttons or it keeps failing and it's asking too many questions and asks you 5 times for your address, you get fed up and you want to leave. You want to, you know, have that almost auto-population and just one-click payment options.
I definitely agree with you. I mean, I think a transaction should be as seamless as possible. And I think that the pandemic has made the consumer realize that. I mean, you mentioned with the move to e-commerce, everybody, because of course the shops were closed, you know, so so there was a massive drive for consumers to e-commerce, but then obviously there was businesses as well, and they were like, oh, you know, we've got to sell online now, and it was a massive shift that happened very quickly, you know. So, and I think it was more of a case of, you know, fall or fly kind of scenario, you know.
And I found that really impressive, seeing even the smallest shops make that adaptation really quickly. I found that so impressive, and just got really excited when you'd pop to your local pub and they had to shut down, but they'd found that hatch window where they could start selling stuff and had, modernized their payment systems to then be able to accept stuff at their door, when before they might have just been like cash only, and then they've been able to use the new technology, the acceleration of the innovation to adapt to the business models that they had to do to survive. It's good the technology was there. If we'd had this pandemic a decade or so ago, we'd all been struggling to get access to cash, probably.
Yeah, it would be a very different story, wouldn't it? It's incredible. I mean, you know, today there's so many different companies here and so many different people. I was wondering, what payment models are you most excited to see this year?
For me, it's the gig economy space and other business areas where payments has become the value proposition of how they not only get their employees, but also get their client base. And I think the influencer space, whether it's Instagram or TikTok, is a good example of that, or even, you know, taxi companies where an employee, whether it's an influencer, they are an employee in the end, of these platforms, want to be paid as soon as they've made some money. You know, that TikTok influencer may go viral on their 100th video or their 10,000th video, but if they go viral and suddenly they've made, you know, £100 instead of a pound, they want to cash out on that straight away. And I think these companies where they're being able to fold instant payments and real-time payments into their business model to therefore get employees, I think is really exciting, because then they build their base to be able to get customers. If all these delivery companies can't get enough staff, then we can't get what we're, you know, as the consumers can't get what we're looking for as well. So I think it's been really interesting to see that move away from monthly salaries and just pay on demand, which as instant payments has been able to help deliver that.
I think, you know, you're absolutely right, and maybe not so much in the UK and in Europe, but in the US we've seen what they call the Great Resignation, and I think your answer really highlights how the payment needs of the employee are shaping the payment techniques of the business. And it's a really interesting answer, and I think I definitely agree with you. I think it's something that will become increasingly prevalent within the industry. I mean, there's so much, you know. I mean, that was just one very small part of PayTech. There's so many different elements of facilitating a transaction. What, in your opinion, will make this technology more accessible?
I would say there's going to be a lot of options, both for the consumer and for the businesses, and option is great, but can be overwhelming. And so I think there will need to be careful consideration for almost not restricting, but being aware of the different options, and that whether it ends up being regulation or the use of standards to say there may be lots of different options for these particular areas of PayTech, but they must behave a certain way. Because I think if consumers become too overwhelmed with the options, they may revert back to old methods, or even just not be open to new change. I think contactless has been taken up because it's easy, you know, especially with your phone. You point your phone, you paid. If there were too many different ways of it working, like if, you know, one model of phone worked differently to another model of phone, you might not be too happy with using that. So I think it's got to be, the element of options needs to be very managed, but also for the businesses, it needs to be easy to integrate, cost effective. It can't be too hard or a barrier of entry for the smallest businesses to be able to make use of it. If it's expensive or complicated to do, again, that uptake won't be there. Not every business has a vast amount of investment money that they can use, or large tech teams that they can delve into the use of APIs and integrate with these technologies. It needs to be accessible and easy to use. And you know, a good example of that, I would say, is the fact that you walk into London tube stations and you can see buskers with their contactless, you know, for tips and stuff. And I think that's just so cool, because I always feel really bad before that, where you had no cash on you. And so these people would have been like losing out on money. And I love that they've been able to adapt to that. And a big part of that is because those contactless methods and the apps they're now using were cheap and accessible. And if that hadn't been made possible that way, then we wouldn't be seeing that.
I think you've raised a really important point, that all these innovators really have to consider that it's not too high tech, and that it is usable and practical, you know. And I think we recently had the introduction of the strong customer authentication for e-commerce especially. And I think from what I understand, it's going to make the transaction process much more difficult, So it is a very, very interesting space at the moment, and we'll have to discuss more about this with everybody here at the summit. It'll be very, very interesting to see how this can be more accessible and how it can be sort of further to the masses, really. It's a really, really interesting space. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the event.
Yeah, it'll be good fun.
Thank
you
you
very much.
Thank you.